After 7 years, the bullshit is finally over. Euphoria, aka teen porn, if you have been hiding under a rock, has been one of the most controversial shows of the decade. We had people complaining this was glorifying teen sex, and drugs, and alcohol, and beat. Everybody had an absolute cow over the fact that they were showing these supposed teenagers nude and having full frontal nude. Sam Levinson having an absolute fetish over women suffering. Sam Levinson having issues amongst the working crew, some of those being Barbie Ferreira. She ended up exiting the show after season 2 over discrepancies and arguments that the two were having. Sam Levinson dropping the only male black character in season 2 for whatever the fuck reason. Labyrinth being the composer of the show exiting in season 3 over whatever feud that we still don't know the full details about. The show's insane. Okay, it's absolutely insane. You have to give Sam Levinson props for making something as iconic as this, because everyone's gonna know Euphoria. Everyone knows Euphoria. Whether you hate it, whether you love it, the world knows. Now that it's officially ended, we have to take a look back to see if this was all good since the beginning or if it was always trash, because there are people that to this day say that the first season was genius. It was amazing. It was brilliant. Season 2 was still pretty good, and season 3 is where the issues lie. And season 3 is where Sam Levinson went off the rails and just fucking had to show Cassie in a baby suit or whatever the fuck he was trying to do. Quentin Tarantino ain't got nothing on Sam Levinson's fetishes. But was it good before? Was it truly a masterpiece before season 3? I would argue no. I would argue absolutely not. Now, I will be fair though. I am going to be devil's advocate in trying to see the good in all of the seasons, because I will admit that there is at least some good in each season. Even if you hated season 3, and there are a lot of issues with season 3, Sam Levinson has some positives with his work, okay? As much as I hate to admit it, because I think the guy's a creep personally, he has his little strokes of genius moments throughout the series, and I have to give him credit for it. For the first season alone, the aesthetic was just gorgeous. The cinematography was stunning. Ooh, the cinematographer that he hired for the first season. Apparently the lead cinematographer's name is Marcel Rev, and worked very closely with Sam Levinson. The neon lit aesthetic that's more dreamlike, that really made the show unique in its own, and everybody knows it for its unique lighting. Fuck, there were so many TikToks made of Euphoria. If you do that purple neon with the glowing sparkly eyeshadow, people immediately think Euphoria. So I definitely have to give it credit for how it looked in season 1 especially. I would argue that it was the best looking in season 1. And we'll get into how it changed in season 2, but for me personally, that was the stamp, that was the signature that made Euphoria unique amongst all of their TV shows. Of course, there's obviously the music that everybody knows and loves. Labyrinth, hello? Ooh, the way he was severely missed in season 3. When I look at some of the scenes that happened in season 3 versus season 1, I thought to myself, this scene would be 10 times better with Labyrinth's musical score. And no shade to Hans Zimmer, because Hans Zimmer obviously is a well-renowned composer, one of the best composers ever, arguably, but God, it just does not compare to Labyrinth in terms of the Euphoria stamp. I really wish the best for this man's future, because damn that score. You know, I'm tired. Huge. Then obviously there's the acting, okay? Zendaya, as much as people like to hate on her, which I don't know why, because she seems like a really lovely person, but as much as people love to hate on her, that, oh, we see her in too much, she's in everything, she acts the same in every movie, she acted her ass off in Euphoria, okay? And you cannot deny that. This role as Rue, oh, fuck. No, she deserved that Emmy. No, she truly did. When I rewatched everything for this video, I thought to myself, okay, yeah, she... fucking hell. Oh my god. She has different levels to her acting. She's not just yelling and screaming all the time. She also has teary eyed, she cries, she whimpers, she whispers when she's whimpering. And just to portray a drug addict the way that she did felt the most raw and authentic that I've ever seen put to screen. She did the most and then some. Not just her though with the acting, but you also have fantastic actors like Jacob Elordi as well. The way he portrays Nate Jacobs, fuck. You guys don't understand how hard it is for a nice person to portray a despicable human and to have multiple people hate you because they truly believe that you're that despicable human. I don't think people think that now, obviously, considering that he's done so many other roles and people know Jacob Elordi is a nice guy. But when he was first introduced as Nate Jacobs, goodness, there were posts and stakeout. People were naming their dog shit after Nate Jacobs. I'm serious. That's all due to Jacob Elordi and his fantastic acting as well. Not only does he have to hide his accent, but also act like a complete psycho sociopath. I couldn't see anybody else playing Nate Jacobs the way Jacob Elordi did. And obviously you have other fantastic acting here too. I'll argue Sydney Sweeney, as much as she gets hated on for her reasons. She did a good job. I think she did a great job, actually. I will say even great, because a lot of the emotions that she had to portray, especially in season 2, was not easy. So I'll give her some credit for that, for sure. Obviously, Alexa Demi, Barbie, damn. Hunter Schafer, they all deserve their snaps when it comes to their acting. The casting department deserves their raises for who they casted. Fun fact, Maddy actually was supposed to be a white blonde. So that's interesting. In season 1, there were obviously certain plot points that were done well and does continue on into season 2 and even season 3. But for the most part, a lot of these plots aren't properly explored, and that's where it really starts faltering here, because where you think that this was good TV is really due to the fact that you had some really great editors. I'll also credit the editing department as well. Shit. They make these scenes cinematic. They really elevate it in terms of how obviously that it's shot, but also the way that it's edited. Ooh, just also lends itself and wouldn't be the same. It would just be any other average teen show had it not been for the way that these scenes were edited and the way that the gravitas of certain moments are put together because of the editing. You have some really fantastical scenes with their kind of dreamlike montagey where Rue's explaining her history and her backstory with her drug addiction, with the little mini stories of each character at the beginning of each episode is done insanely well. It's very gripping and captivating and sucks you right into their story. And I also have to give credit to the writing there too, because for having a little, maybe less than 10-minute segment for each person, they do a really well enough job of having you understand enough about that character while not giving too much, but giving enough away and tying it together with whatever issue that they're going through in this particular season. Why these teenagers are messed up the way they are. And then wrapping it up with the editing just all together, you have these insane moments. Like when Nate shows up at the Halloween party with Maddy, he's not going to go to jail and has escaped his abuse allegations. With the music and the slow-mo and the reactions, it's just, they make moments like this feel that much more impactful because of the way that they're edited. And that's a big reason why I think people like me enjoy this show so much. And even my dad, when you go into season 3, because of the way that these things are edited. I mean, fuck, in terms of writing, I don't think Sam Levinson should write again. Personally, I think he has a lot where he can learn and grow from. But if he's given a good, smart script, I think he actually has a lot to offer in terms of directing, I have to say. That might be controversial, but sorry. Do I think he's a little weird when it comes to fetishes and what he's written for this show? Yes, 1,000%. I don't think he should be writing. But do I think he has talent that could be used elsewhere appropriately? Yeah, I do, actually. But of course, where there's all these positives, in particular for season 1, plot-wise, issues. One of them being underage webcamming, having a minor show herself doing a bunch of shit on a website for adult men to enjoy and making it look entertaining and fun. I think that was probably the grossest thing for me for season 1. A lot of the plot points in season 1 in particular that don't lend over into season 2 were pretty fine, but that one fucked me up good. That one had me wanting to smash a brick over my face. You have this teenage girl who's either 16, 17, they've switched between ages, I can't remember, but it's 16, 17, and she's webcamming. She's fully, partially nude, webcamming for old men. Now, when it comes to Kat, do I like the body positivity aspect of her plotline? Yes, 1,000%. Do I not like the webcamming of a minor to make herself feel more confident, and that seemingly makes her feel more confident? No, absolutely the fuck not. What the fuck are you trying to promote here, Sam Levinson? So this one's weird because here we have at first Kat, who is trying her hardest to not be a virgin anymore and just flinging her cooch over to any guy who's giving it attention, loses her virginity in the very first episode, and she's happy about it because all of her friends freaking pressured her. And I already hate this alone because what the fuck are you pressuring a teenage girl to have sex for? What are you doing? It happens, sure, but why are we making it seem like she's wrong for not having sex at this age and that every single teenager should be sexually active? That's how the first season felt. Because you have Jules here who tells her, girl, you need to get some dick. Then you have Maddy and Kat's friend Baby who's shaming her. As soon as she loses her virginity to some loser kid who probably hasn't even grown his pubes yet, they're celebrating. They're celebrating her for it. Fuck, dude. You know, any teenager who's going to be watching this is going to be thinking, wow, I need to do that. Yeah, I need to be cool and just get it over with so I can talk to my friends about it and be freaking cool. They make it look cool. I'm not trying to shame anyone. I'm just saying that let's not promote it. How about let's not promote that? How about that? You can do it. I just wouldn't really want to be shaming it. If you're a virgin in high school is what I don't appreciate. Just like we don't want to slut shame, let's not virgin shame. How about that? But yet there's that going on in the first episode, and so that's freaking annoying. She gets that done and over with, but unfortunately, but somewhat fortunate for her with the way she takes it, someone took a video of her, released it, that's child pornography, thank you, and tries to get it taken down, but then when it's up, she noticed that a lot of people were commenting on it, like, oh my god, this girl's so hot, oh my god, she's so sexy, and just validating her. All of these random ass strangers just validating that shit. And so she starts to get the idea, oh, well, these men, they seem to be liking it, so maybe I should just continue doing that, because I'm going to be a star up in, I'm going to get all the love and attention up in here from these men. She starts doing it, and they make it seem funny. And I'm like, that's not fucking funny, that's child. Sorry if I'm a prude, but as a older adult female right now, I look back at that and I think, Lord, if that was my child, oh my god, we're sending her to Sunday school. No, but honestly, it was just such weird framing, because it's one thing if you frame it that it's weird and gross. They kind of try to do that, but not really, because there's this montage of her with all these men and her degrading all these men, and she's getting a bunch of money from these men. So it's just a weird tone. Sam Levinson doesn't seem to know what message he wants to send. And that's going to be a theme throughout all of these seasons, is that he just simply doesn't know what he wants to say, I think, for all of these plot points that he does, besides the drug addiction plotline. Because then we have a scene where it's framed as weird, where she's degrading this guy and he's acting all, but then, I don't know, she laughs about it anyways, and then it's not until the very end of the season where she gets on camera with someone that doesn't want to show their face, and it's just heavy breathing and has some kind of app that makes your voice change. It's not until that person that she feels uncomfortable and completely shuts it off for good. But to me, I was thinking, okay, how does that prove the point that this is bad? You just had her have one uncomfortable experience and then she seemingly quits it, and then that's it. But then again, if you're trying to say something about webcamming, if you're trying to say something about the dangers of it or the creepiness of it, that doesn't really follow through with just this one encounter. There should have been so much more explored to this, where at the very least, maybe it was someone that was a teacher at the school, and have us follow that teacher from the school and then realize that that's the person that's on the other side, and that have Kat somehow know this, somehow figure this out, that it's the teacher from the school that seemed to be a nice person but ended up being an absolute creep. Because unfortunately that is something that does happen in schools too, where you have creeps, unfortunately, very horribly so, working at schools. So it could have been a commentary on the dangers of webcamming and how as a minor you should not be doing this because you don't know who's on the other side, and it's most likely a person that's a creep and doing some creepy shit, has some creepy habit. You have commentary on school and how sometimes they unfortunately hire the wrong people, and that you have to be aware of these predators that will be in schools just to be closer to children. So there's just so much, right? I just said all that. I don't know if you guys think that's a brilliant idea or not, but I just thought there was a lot more that you could have unpacked there, and a lot more that you could have said with that, and have an ending to it to make it that much more impactful of just, let's let children not do this. But yet it was just one strange blank screen encounter, and then she just decides not to. And that's basically it. And it just felt like nothing. There was just nothing to it, and to me, the overall thing just felt really gross. It's just her shaking her ass to Drake. That's all it was. Mind you, too, spoiler alert for season 2, when we get to it, she goes back to doing it. She goes back to it. So what was the point? Speaking of creeps, speaking of adults inappropriately with children, that's another major issue with season 1, is the way that they normalize adults with these teenagers is disgusting. And I'm happy at the very least season 2 seemed to stay more away from that, but not entirely, because apparently there was a plotline that did get cut that he was planning to do, but it would have been gross. And I'll talk about it. This whole adults with minor situation is just so bizarre in the first season. And again, makes me really question what are you doing? With that example of Kat, okay, we have that feels weirdly normalized that she's doing this for these grown men. Then we have Jules, this trans girl who sleeps with this old 40, 50-year-old adult man in the very first episode. That looks so uncomfortable, and again, I guess they filmed it to make it look uncomfortable, but she still did it, and it's implied that she's been doing this with men for a while, and it's just fucking weird. It's fucking bizarre. It's fucking strange. The thing is that's even weirder is that they do focus on the man who did this to her, and it ended up being Nate Jacobs' dad, whose name is Cal, played by the amazing late Eric Dane, rest in peace. And they do actually explore this character more in season 2, but yet not in the way that you would expect, in the sense that they probably should have demonized him more rather than make you try to empathize with this character. But instead, yeah, that's what they do. Okay, why don't we, if you want to go dark, and you're showing a man who's willing to sleep with a child, someone that's that young, then why don't you show his mentality and who he is as a person in a creepy way? And that's a PSA to kids, to avoid adults, please. But no. And then if you want to say, to be fair, he thought she was 22. She said she was 22 years old. But like, come on. If you doubt it, if you have any doubts as an adult, really? Where she literally looks like a baby, she looks like a teenager. Really? That's your due diligence. She says she's 22, you're looking at her face, you know she looks like a baby, you don't go through with it. It's as simple as that. That's your responsibility. They do paint it out as if he truly made a mistake and he truly didn't know that she was 22, and he apologizes that, oh, if I would have known that you were a teenager, I wouldn't have done this. But come on. That's what's weird about it to me, is that it feels like they're deflecting the accountability from him And we'll get more into it in season 2 with this plotline that it does continue on for season 2. But to me, especially with season 1, it just felt very deflective, and that they're not trying to make him seem like the creep that he is, even though he is truly a creep. And then they don't help it that much more in season 2. There was that with Jules, and then we also have Maddy, which they don't explore it, but they say it. And with just saying it, I thought to myself, what is the point of this? Why are you guys trying so hard to normalize teenage girls with men? Stop. Please stop. We have this intro montage on Maddy explaining how she was when she was a child and how she grew up. And then at one point, Rue, as the narrator, says that she lost her virginity while on vacation to a 40-year-old man. And that it might seem creepy and weird, but she was totally in control. Ew! 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 And then they showcase her banging other adult men, including a stockbroker with a family and a guy who owns a skating rink, and just, what? And they show it just so casual, like, here you go. Here's her banging other men. That's just it. There's just no commentary on that whatsoever. That's it. For me, that was definitely, of all of the controversies that Euphoria had with its nudity, with just glamorizing sex in general, I personally took more of an issue with how they were normalizing these teenage girls with grown men. Gross. Disgusting. Filthy. Revolting! And then there's obviously been videos, many videos talking about the over-sexualization, so I won't go over it too much because, like I said, there are a lot out there that talk about it, but if you're unaware, yes, that is very true. We had Alexa Demi be nude for certain scenes in season 1. Obviously, Sydney Sweeney, who she continues to be nude for the rest of the series. Hunter Schafer. Show these girls nude, and that they're supposedly teenage girls, but they show them nude and having different types of sex with different dudes, and it's just, yeah. Yes, there are a lot of boobs, a lot of tits. That happened. I'm happy at least they didn't get Zendaya. She was like, nah, brah, you can't pay me enough for that. It's just so icky, especially for first season, when you're taking advantage of these actors who are obviously, striving to be famous and trying to, get their bag in a big show like this. So I just, there's something about it. I hate Hollywood. There is that aspect, unfortunately, to it, and I feel like there's even more glamorization of it in season 2 in particular, because I don't want to say at the very least, but they don't so much as glamorize it in season 1 as much as showcase violence, which is another thing in itself, and unfortunately they don't really get into that either. They do touch on it a little bit with Cassie and McKay, but Maddy is also shown being roughly handled in that way. And then, I guess not really, Kat, I guess in the first episode with her losing her virginity. And so it's more so violence. Jules with her scene with Cal. It's very uncomfortable, and I believe it's meant to make you feel uncomfortable, but yet they don't really say anything about this either. Where I will give the show credit for season 1 in particular is highlighting Rue's drug addiction. Of course, this was always going to be something that was highlighted well because Sam Levinson himself has personal experience with this, so it makes sense why he would write this particular plotline well and developed, because it's close to his heart and it's personal. This was always going to be the best plot of Euphoria, and I stand by that it is still the best plot of Euphoria going into season 2 and then somewhat season 3, but I will say that unfortunately, it doesn't really do as well in season 3, in particular with Rue's case, but we'll get more into it when we get to season 3. But in terms of season 1, yes, we have the full fleshed out plotline to show what it is to be a drug addict, how you can get to a place where you start to take drugs, and then unfortunately that you get that addiction, you get that habit, that you want that feeling over and over again. In Rue's case, they showcase how she was taking care of her dad, who she loved very, very dearly, which is just tragic to me and close to home for me, because I thankfully have not lost my dad, but I love my dad so much. And so seeing how close she was with her dad, it just, man, it hits me. That was tragically beautiful to explore, and we see how she took care of him because the mom was working and she's the oldest daughter, so of course she was going to be taking care of him when he was on his deathbed. And because it was so painful for her, she just started to look at his pills, got the idea, took one day, and then just continued to spiral from there. And especially considering that he did end up dying, it was just her coping mechanism, and it just continued to be her coping mechanism, unfortunately. And she goes on to numerous speeches into explaining her feeling and why she just gravitates towards that feeling, that there's silence, she doesn't have to overthink, and it just lets her be at peace when she's on drugs. And so it's really, really sad, but it does have you understand why someone would go through becoming a drug addict and how that happens to anybody, and how she was someone who was completely clean, completely sober beforehand, and then this just ended up eating away at her life, and that changed her life for the worse. We have the introduction of Ali. I didn't know that he was going to be such an important character, honestly, but I'm actually pretty delightfully surprised about it because Coleman Domingo is such a powerhouse of an actor. I actually appreciated the fact that they knew the talent that they had and they continued to use that for the future seasons. So I'm like, yes, good Sam Levinson. Keep using Coleman Domingo. She ends up finding him through AA, or sorry, I don't know if it's AA, but one of her meetings. And he ends up calling her out on her bullshit because she keeps saying that she's clean, but she's not. She actually continues to be a drug addict, and she's hiding it very well from her family and her friends. He's the one that starts mentoring her and helping her and sees himself almost through her, and you see that because afterwards we do get more into his backstory later on, but we do know that he unfortunately abused his wife and was just a drug addict and not there for his family, and so then he destroys most precious relationships, and he doesn't want the same thing to happen to Rue. It was just such a beautiful bond, a beautiful friendship, and he flags things to her too, not just her drug addiction, but also just being an addictive personality overall, because her relationship with Jules starts becoming a little too addictive and a little too dependent, because that's her new thing that she starts to latch onto instead of the drugs. But then he points that out to her, hey, that could also not be a great thing for you. You know that, right? You can't just latch on to the next thing. You can't just make someone or something be the thing that you're holding on to and be your reason of living, or depend on that to make you happy. If the drugs aren't making you happy, you have to have overall happiness in your life and a balance of things. But she doesn't get that in season 1, and I appreciate that. It feels more so by the end of season 2 she's made peace with it, that she realizes, I'm skipping ahead here, but she realizes by the end of season 2 that she doesn't need Jules and that she should be doing this by herself and being clean on her own. That was a really good arc with her that we'll get more into. But for season 1, I really loved all of that exploration and getting that ending to just solidify that much more, that the codependency is something that Jules was something that she was clinging on to for happiness, and when she loses Jules she goes back to the drug addiction, unfortunately. And so yeah, Coleman was right. She hasn't developed or grown yet by the end of season 1, but definitely how addiction works and how addictive personalities work, and just the exploration of that was fantastically done, I would say. And it hits so hard at the very end when you see that the sweater that she has on the entire season is her dad's. It's her dad's. It's so good. I'll also say that relatively well they explored abuse through Maddy and Nate's relationship and how an abusive relationship looks like, and I personally think it was done well. You see why Nate is the way he is, and you see why Maddy is the way that she is, and why Maddy keeps going back to Nate, and why Nate is the abusive asshole that he is. And not to excuse it, I hate people that defend Nate. I don't know why you defend that behavior, but please don't. Abusers are abusers, and there's no excuse for it. Whether it be they grew up in a fucked up system, a fucked up childhood, I don't care. You can break that mold. You don't have to be doing all that. You have a choice as a human, and he chose to be this way. Yeah, he's fucked up. Go to therapy. Go try to better yourself. Someone has to hold this guy accountable for his actions, and unfortunately nobody was in season 1. The thing is that with Nate's character, you realize that he has a lot of trauma having to do with his father, and that him as a child, and very terribly so, got exposed to his dad's self-tapes with others. And I guess that just messed him up so mentally, because also he hears and sees the dad degrading these people and smacking these people around, right? So then in his head, I don't know, I guess he gets angry though because of this. And so that's why he's just an abuser, because he's just angry about all of this. And there's the sentiment that he probably has internalized homophobia, but then that's not fully explored, unfortunately, which I think should have been. But anyways, that's a whole other thing. Needless to say, we get an understanding as to why Nate is the way he is, why he would be an abuser, but not excusing it. And then Maddy, we start to understand why she keeps going back to him, because we see her growing up that unfortunately her parents don't really have a loving relationship. And she says herself that mom and her dad don't talk to each other. They don't even look at it. There's just no love that's there. And so she hates that and sees that as an example of what she doesn't want. She doesn't want to just be two sitting ducks, which I agree with that sentiment of not wanting that, because I wouldn't want that either. But then she then in turn thinks Nate is a good relationship because he does give her things, but then he also shows her abuse. And that often is, unfortunately, the case of abuse, is that that's the cycle, is that they have ways to manipulate you. They have ways to keep bringing you back by buying you gifts, by massaging your feet. And that's what they show Nate doing for her. And so she thinks that that's the best thing ever. But then that comes with the price of being abused. And in Maddy's head, she thinks it's worth paying that price, where it's not. It's absolutely not. No one should be abused ever. But we get all of that, right? We get all of that development, and we're shown this. And so I really appreciated that highlight, because you see the mentality of how a person would go back to someone like that, and you see the mentality of a person who ends up being an abuser. I think Sam Levinson actually did a pretty good job with that storyline. And then unfortunately, when Nate does push things very far and leaves a bunch of bruisings on Maddy's neck, unfortunately so, terribly so. There's this whole investigation surrounding it. Maddy continues to cover him. It wasn't him, it wasn't him, it wasn't him. And I can't tell you who it is. And then finally we get that really heartbreaking moment of her in the police station, where they take off her clothes forcibly. They take all the pictures, and the police officer says to her, "Whoever did this to you does not love you." Ooh. Ooh, it just hits. See Alexa Demi's face and that line, and it's just, it's so well done. That, I would say, was well done, for sure. It's just showing you the cycle of abuse. As simple as that, with the way that that cop delivered that line and Maddy's reaction, and you see just her stone cold face, that it hits. It hits. That's all you need to know. They don't love you. They don't love you. Oh, unfortunately, she keeps going back to him, so until we get into season 2. But that, I would argue, was done relatively well. And then the exploration of Cassie and her character, I thought was done relatively well, as much as it was okay. Not the best, and I feel like there could have been more had they not gone with the plot that they did end up going with in season 2. But she always seeks male validation because her father left when she was young, and now she's looking for that validation in other men, that she doesn't have it from her father. And that's the unfortunate thing, that, you know, people like to make fun of daddy issues. People like to say that, right? But it's honestly true. It's honestly true, where unfortunately there is a pattern. Not saying every single woman, obviously, but there is a pattern to it of women who don't have a good relationship with their father, that they end up, unfortunately, climbing into relationships that aren't healthy, or finding themselves looking for male validation constantly. And it's a thing. It's a thing. but not generalizing it, not saying that it happens for everybody, but it is a thing that happens. So it was good to explore through Cassie. I did feel really bad for her character in the season, and seeing how all these guys think she's a whore, think she's a slut, she's painted all these things, but it's because of this, and we understand why she feels the need for male validation. I just wish we got growth from that. I wish we got development from that. We don't get development for it in season 1, unfortunately, and then we never do, spoiler alert. But I think seeing her backstory and the reason why she is the way she is was well done, but then the rest of the way that it was handled wasn't the best. It made sense for when she wasn't with McKay, that she immediately clung on to the next guy that was giving her attention, which was Daniel, who ended up being a complete asshole, and she ends up feeling shit about herself. But then they end up having her being pregnant and then getting a schmishmortion. That's just kind of glossed over, to be honest. They don't really dive too deep into it. I will say in comparison to some other shows, it wasn't the worst way to handle it, but it definitely wasn't the best either, because it seems like she actually wanted to keep the kid, but when she tells McKay, who's the baby daddy, he's convincing her not to, and so then she ends up getting the schmishmortion, and then that does affect her for season 2 and her depression. It was a weird way to develop her plotline, in my humble opinion. I would have just continued focusing on the whole need for male validation and seeing how that could develop and follow through. But yeah, they just threw that in there, and I just seemed pretty random to me, to be honest. And then we have Jules. I appreciated Jules' backstory as well, but I personally felt like they didn't explore her enough. We do see the trans experience and how, unfortunately, for Jules' character's case, the mom thought that she was just mentally unwell and just stuck her in this terrible facility. Dad ended up getting full custody. She ended up transitioning. But then, besides that, for season 1 in particular, we'll get into the solo episodes a bit as well, but for season 1, she just starts talking a little bit about femininity and what it means to her, and how she explored it through men and felt like men was a big part of her femininity. That's basically all we get from that in season 1. And then she ends up falling for Rue and returning the feelings that Rue has for Jules. Besides having Cal bang her, and then that hanging over her head, and then her falling for Nate, but then it was an accident because she didn't know it was Nate, and then being tricked in that way, and then she gets roped in on the I felt like they didn't know what to do with this character, truly, other than being a love interest for Rue. And that's basically it. This is a character that I feel gets unnecessarily hated on in terms of season 1 anyway. Season 1, I didn't think Jules was bad. I just feel like they didn't develop her as well as they could have in season 1. Season 2 and 3, we'll talk about. In terms of McKay 2, I thought that was interesting exploration into masculinity and toxic masculinity, and how these guys terribly haze him, and he has a traumatic experience of violation from these guys when he's in college, and then he thinks to be a man, he tries to be more masculine by being violent than with Cassie, which is not okay. And then I wanted him to learn something through that, but then they axed his character. They had such an interesting setup for McKay and his character, and they didn't do anything with it. It's such a shame. I talk more about it in a separate video if you guys want to check that out, but they set him up to explore something very interesting with how toxic masculinity is, especially in colleges, and then they just didn't do anything with it. They just have him have this traumatic experience, and that's basically it. That's basically it. And then Cassie gets pregnant, he doesn't want it, and then that's it. It's just so underdeveloped. I hate it because there was so much potential. There was so much more. Speaking of what didn't go over in season 2, let's get into it, because what the fuck? This is post-COVID, mind you. Sam Levinson was able to film and do this whole show so that it released in 2019 for the first season, and then right when they were going to start filming season 2, boom, COVID hits. I get the delay here. However, with that delay, you would think you would get smarter writing, right? Continuing on with McKay, as I'm talking about McKay, yeah, he's just gone. Sam Levinson, as I mentioned earlier, he wrote him off. Poor actor. Apparently, yeah, he didn't really get the fair warning for that. Probably thought that he was going to continue on into season 2, and Sam Levinson just said no. And I fucking hate that because, like I said, you had something so interesting to say about toxic masculinity, and yet you decide to drop the character that you were exploring that through? Why? I really, really wish that he would have kept McKay around to really follow through with that because, again, the only person who really goes through a whole arc and a whole journey is Rue, and he fully develops Rue in her story, whereas everybody else, where is their development? The other thing that I didn't talk about in season 1, but I'll talk about briefly, is along with the abuse relationship that Maddy and Nate have in season 1 and that plotline, is also this plotline involving this 22-year-old guy named Tyler, and Maddy ended up banging him at this party in front of Nate, but then she claims that she was blacked out, so then Nate beats the shit out of him, even though it's basically implied that he knows that Maddy was lying about it, but he still beats the shit out of him anyways, more so because he sees Maddy as his property and that the guy touched her, so he's just hating on the guy because he banged his girl, essentially. And then they go through with putting him in jail. They go through having Jules make a statement saying that she also knows that Tyler was the one that left those marks on Maddy. And that leaves Nate scot-free and this guy that ends up going to jail. That whole thing happens, right? And it fucks Jules up. She ends up being okay a few episodes later, but it fucks her up. It doesn't really affect Maddy, and then it definitely doesn't affect Nate because going into season 2, completely dropped this plotline. We never hear about this plotline ever again, and it's crazy because it was such a huge part of season 1. Nothing comes from this. Why would you put that in there? For no reason. And I think it could have been more natural having Maddy realize what an abusive asshole Nate was and have her hate Nate for that and want justice and have her becoming a better person herself through that and having that action show her trying to grow and be a better person by getting this guy out of jail and her saying, you know, I'm sorry. I did use you in that night at the pool or trying to piss off Nate and, you know, he had this emotional hold over me. So that's why I thought I was doing the right thing by sending you to jail, but it wasn't the right thing. Cassie's abortion, even though you could argue that there's one, I believe, throwaway line from Rue that says that she hadn't been the same since prom, which means since the schmishmortion. And so you could argue that her going through everything that she goes through this season is because of that she's spiraling because of that. But in my humble opinion, my very first video on this channel was talking about how they didn't explore that enough and they didn't highlight that enough for me. And they didn't have to make the whole thing about it, not saying that, but at least showcase, like how they did at the beginning of each episode for season 1, showcase her going through a mental instability before New Year's. All of these things that she could be going through, it just wasn't explored. And we're immediately locked into season 1, seeing her getting drunk and then banging Nate, and then that's it. Kat and her character, what the fuck? As I mentioned earlier with the webcamming, she gives it a stop. She gives it a rest at the end of season 1. And then she ends up actually exploring a relationship with this guy named Ethan, who is a nice guy and expressed interest in her throughout season 1. And so they finally give each other a shot. She seems to be making the right decision with this too, that it's great. Have a cute high school relationship. Yes, please. Someone who treats you well. But then again, with Sam Levinson, he's so weird where they make it out that he's too much of a nice guy and she wants to just break up with him because he's too nice. And that's essentially her whole plot for season 2. Yeah. To me, it was kind of bullshit because I get it. Not every guy is for you, and the whole nice guy trope, I get it that maybe you want someone with a better sense of humor. You can still be a nice guy but have personality. I feel like that's another issue that I have is how they portray nice guys in certain shows and movies, and that's definitely the way that they were trying to show Ethan here, besides I guess the last episodes where he did show a lot of personality with the musical. But they try to show these guys almost as boring and that being nice is boring. You can be a nice guy with a great personality. Tell me if I'm wrong, but sorry, is that so insane to comprehend? Is that actually non-existent? For whatever reason, they showcased that he was just this lackluster, corny guy. Anytime they're on the phone, he's like, I love you more. They tried to make it seem that it was just corny, but dude, come on. She's a teenager. Let her be with a nice guy. Promote being with a nice, healthy guy. No, Sam Levinson is gonna have an absolute cow if anybody ends up in a healthy relationship, I tell you that. There's that for Kat and her plotline, and that she's consistently trying to break up with him. They didn't give enough time for Kat and her character this season, and that was partially the dispute between Barbie and Sam, is that apparently he had ideas for her character and she didn't like it, and basically as a consequence that ended up having him axe her character more from the season. So they had something really interesting, I thought, at the very beginning of the season, where they show this scene where Kat's being ganged up by a bunch of women and different feminist ideologies. One of them saying, yeah, body positivity. Remember when you did that shit? That was great. And then fight the power, fight the system. It's just a bunch of, just almost making a mockery of the feminist movement. But I honestly like the tongue-in-cheekness of it, because honestly it can be kind of funny. I obviously am pro-feminist, but you know what I mean? Like there are certain people and certain influencers that make it seem not as serious as it is, if that makes sense. I actually appreciated that scene, and I thought that there was something to it and that they were going to do something with it in regards to Kat's character, because she was especially body positivity last season. So I thought to myself, oh wow, that would be really cool to explore how maybe she ends up being an influencer and ends up feeling the pressure though of being a good role model influencer, and using that as instead of webcamming, but now she's an influencer. And in a positive way, okay, not in a sexual way, being one of those body positivity women and then feeling the anxiety and pressures of being this way, and how maybe she still has some insecurities to herself, and maybe there are some online trolls and that gets to her or something, that it was just, there was some meat there. There was something to it. And then again, they just didn't do anything with it. And then Jules. The fuck happened to Jules? As I was mentioning earlier, they did end up having 2 spin-off Christmas episodes for Euphoria before season 2. Hunter Schafer actually got to co-write this episode, which is fantastic. Thank you, Sam. At least Hunter got to write. And you can feel that in her episode, right? With the trans experience and her explaining that, and her talking about femininity. And again, now realizing that she doesn't have to attribute it with men, and men doesn't have to be the focus of her femininity, and that she's giving men a rest. And I loved that. I loved hearing all of that through her episode and exploring all of that. Unfortunately, ever since her well-written episode, they don't do much with her character ever since. That's the last good piece of Jules, I have to say. And that's such a shame, because, again, I thought that character had a lot of potential too. She was interesting, but I also thought underdeveloped in season 1, and then you have this great development in this middle, whatever you want to say, episode of between seasons 1 and 2, and then you could have done so much with that, but then no. They showcase it through her clothes, which I appreciated. Her wardrobe isn't as traditionally feminine, I guess you could say, in the sense of she was dressing in a lot of skirts in season 1, a lot of pinks and purples and frilly outfits, but in season 2 they have her dressing in more neutral tones, cool tones with blues and greens, and then having full pants and cargos and long baggy shirts. And so I really appreciated that, because that made it feel more, yes, this is a continuation to what she was saying earlier in her episode, and that she's more empowered in her femininity, that she feels comfortable in herself, that she doesn't have to dress super girly to be feminine. So I loved that. But then for the rest of season 2, she does nothing. Absolutely nothing. Except fuck Dominic Fike and his singing ass, and technically cheat on Rue by doing this. Ugh. Being concerned about Rue and her drug addiction. basically being an accessory of Rue's boo thang, Rue's boo, Rue's honey buns. By the end of the season, there's just not even anything. They don't even wrap up her character or anything. After basically the events that play out is that Rue and Jules get together officially at the start of season 1. However, Rue is still using. She is still doing drugs. With Dominic Fike's character, I forget his name, I don't think it's important. Rue is keeping this a secret from Jules, of course, doesn't want Jules to get concerned. And then Jules ends up trying to have fun times with Rue, but then Rue isn't really much of a fun time person, if you know what I mean. And so then to release herself, she ends up freaking around with Dominic Fike, even though she's with Rue and still very much in a relationship with Rue. Dominic Fike ends up revealing to Jules that they are doing drugs together and that Rue has not been sober and they have been doing drugs ever since New Year's, and that absolutely breaks Jules' heart. Jules ends up telling Rue's mom. Rue ends up getting mad at Jules and bitching her out in this insane scene. Oh my god, the scene was crazy though, I will say. And then that's literally it. That's actually it. The last we see of Jules is Rue giving her a kiss goodbye. And that's it for her of that season. She doesn't do anything. It's such a shame. Instead, what we get is an intro to Fez and his backstory, which I'll admit I did appreciate that we get a little bit more into him and his backstory, considering that he was a character in season 1, but was technically not a main character in season 1. It was nice, and it does end up serving as a plot for the future because Rue gets introduced to Lori through Fez, and then Lori ends up being this big powerhouse drug dealer with parrots. It ends up becoming a plot in Rue's plot. But in terms of Fez himself, I also felt that it was nice getting his backstory, but his development for this season was also pretty weak. I loved seeing him with Lexi. They were so cute. But what do we really get from him other than the fact that he ends up going to jail because he's wrapped up in some serious shit? Yeah, surprise, surprise, the guy who's involved in drug dealing ends up going to jail. They didn't really show him struggling through that until the very last 2 episodes. They showed him just being cute with Lexi, and he's housing Faye, who's the girlfriend of the guy who ends up trying to work with the cops and exposing Fez and all his operation. But we don't really get that until the last 2 episodes. So again, it was just another really underdeveloped plot. We get a Cal episode. A Cal episode? Really? As I mentioned earlier, it's just bizarre because you have this guy who fucked up his son, right? And I guess it wasn't his intent for his son to see those videos, but sorry, he ended up seeing those videos, and it's kind of implied that Cal kind of knows this too. But yet, you didn't think to do anything of it. You didn't think to get your son therapy. You didn't think to do anything except for your selfish ass. And eating ass for your selfish ass. Disgusting. It's despicable. But yet they have you try to sympathize with him by showing his whole backstory and how he was in love with his best friend, but then because he's a pansexual king, I think that's correct, he loves a wide variety of people. He loves all people, which there's nothing wrong with that. However, in his backstory, they show how he was finally exploring his sexuality through his best friend, because up until that point he was only sexual with women, and he did enjoy it, but he also enjoys being sexual with men and other people. And so when he starts fully exploring that is when the shoe drops and the girlfriend ends up being pregnant, and that ends up being his future wife, future kid, and future family with the whole Jacobs family. So that whole backstory I felt was just so unneeded. Interesting, yeah, with the way they tell stories. Again, Sam Levinson can tell a pretty compelling intro backstory to a person, sure. But I thought that was so not needed for Cal, considering that you're trying to make me sympathize with this guy, and I don't. Because here you are choosing to fuck all these people while you're married with kids and putting pressure on your son and making your son go mental and not holding him accountable for being mental and not raising them to be good human beings and just going around fucking anything that moves. Yeah, you felt that obligation and responsibility. And I'm sure there are a lot of people like this. I'm sure there are situations out there like this, but I don't feel bad for you. You don't have to fuck up your family because you feel the need to hide your sexuality. Is that crazy to say? I don't know. Yeah, it was a different time. Yes, people were scared to come out even more so during that time, and that's horrible, and I feel terrible about that. But that doesn't give him reason to fuck up his family. I think that's fair to say. I think it's not an excuse. It can be a reason, but not an excuse. I think that's fair to say. You could have done a million things. If you really wanted to explore and you didn't want to be with your wife anymore, then leave. Leave. Don't put her through this. Don't put her through. I just feel the same for any cheater. Anyone who's cheating, don't be in the relationship you're in. Just give that person grace. If you truly love that person at one point, let them go. If you want to be with other people, please do the right thing by that. If you're a father and you're raising kids, then divorce, but be there to raise your kids. Be there because, yeah, you ended up having kids. Be responsible. Be responsible for your child and teach them good values and good lessons, which Cal was not doing either. I just have very little tolerance for it, and I don't know, again, that might be a controversial opinion. Let me know how you guys feel about it. I don't know if I struck a chord with anybody with that. To add more onto that, just quickly too, just again, the fact that he clearly should have not hooked up with Jules. If you're unsure if that's a minor, step away as the very mature grown adult that you're supposed to be as a 40, 50-year-old man, and do your due diligence. And so I just hate that they painted him out to be just this tragic, sad story, because even further on in another episode, they have him visit the bar where he had his first kiss with his best friend and has that romantic memory, and also try to make that out to be tragic. It's tragic, but don't make him that way. Why did you make him this way? I don't want to feel bad for this guy. I'm sorry, I don't. Not when he's fucking minors. I don't want to feel sympathy for this guy, and I don't know why you're trying to force me to feel that. I think that was the wrong move, and we did not need that. I think the only reason Sam Levinson wrote that is because of the whole Barbie feud. I truly believe that. I think whatever Barbie story was supposed to be for this season and got axed was replaced with Cal. That's what I think happened. Now let's get into the main meat of it, okay? Before I get into the good that's Rue, I'll end it on Rue's note for the season, but the main meat of the season, really, is Cassie and Nate. And the Cassie-Nate fucking scandal behind Maddy's back. And for this, I will say, it made for entertaining television. It was entertaining. Did it make sense? I'll argue no, but it was entertaining as fuck with the way that they did this, I have to admit. I have to admit it. Never have I been so invested in a best friend betrayal, sleeping with your ex/boyfriend behind her back plotline as much as this one with the way they did it. And the way they built it up was just, I'll give him snaps. I'll give him snaps with the way he developed this. However, it was more so entertainment purposes, I would say, for this plotline, which is why I enjoyed it so much. In terms of having it make sense with the characters, I'll argue no, because I have my notes here. If you guys look back in season 1, this actually makes no fucking sense. And you know why? Because Nate slut shames the shit out of Cassie in season 1. He doesn't take her seriously whatsoever, and hounds McKay on it multiple times on, why are you dating this whore? Well, look at her, look at all the things that she's done with all these guys, huh? And making him feel insecure about dating Cassie, who's supposed damaged goods in Nate's eyes. Plus, the fact that Nate is so anal about his property that he doesn't know that Maddy's hooked up with a bunch of other guys. That's been behind his back. That was every time that they were on a break or whatever. But he doesn't know about that. And in his eyes, when he sees Tyler touching what looks to be his property in his head, he goes freaking feral and beats the shit out of him, because in his head, no one else can touch Maddy but him, right? He has this weird hold over her. And they show explicitly too that when they're first about to hook up, he's asking if she's a virgin and that he's into the fact that she's a virgin. And very making notably so that yes, that she is his and that's his woman, right? And that was part of the whole appeal with Maddy to him, was the fact that she was just his. So to have him 180 that mentality, what? Now all of a sudden he just forgot about that? What? It doesn't make sense with his character whatsoever of what you established with him in season 1. I'm sorry, it actually doesn't. Why the fuck, why on God's earth would he even think twice about banging Cassie when in his eyes she was a joke? She was a joke. Maybe he would bang her, but to actually seriously date her? And bang her on multiple occasions? No! Sorry, I don't buy it. I don't buy it with the way that you set this character up in season 1. I don't. It makes no sense. What happened to his principles? Would you not think that he would go freaking feral? McKay is even shown in the first episode. And yeah, it shows him being a little hostile towards him and weird towards him. But you wouldn't think that he would beat the shit out of him or something with the way that he was with Tyler in season 1 and how enraged he was imagining Tyler with Maddy. All the guys that have been with Cassie that they established that she has slept with a lot of dudes. At the very least, he sleeps with her the first time, right? On New Year's. And have at least one scene where we have him overhear some guy talking about that time that he banged Cassie. And then he just goes mental of, oh, fuck, she's a whore. She's a slut. That's in his head that he thinks these things, right? And that he goes off on her because obviously he's a fucked up guy and thinks of her as his property now, right? So have something like that happen, but that never happens. That never happens. And so to me, it just made no fucking sense that all of a sudden he's just in love with her and can see a future with her and imagines her having his babies and getting married to her. It just, I'm sorry, it did not make any sense. He never pops off at her until that one episode of her threatening to tell Maddy about their relationship, and that's it. That's it. It's just so bizarre. And then on Cassie's case, I could understand it a little bit in terms of her continuing on the need for male validation. She's at a low point in her life after the schmortion. I could see a little bit more reason for that, but I just wish that it didn't come out of nowhere in terms of there was no setup for this in season 1. Sam Levinson just came out of this out of the blue, out of nowhere. I don't know what inspired this from him, but again, it made for good TV. I'll say that, but in terms of continuation, no. There was no hints to this whatsoever. Cassie and Maddy were established as best friends in season 1, right? And Cassie was hooked on McKay. Very much in love with McKay until the whole Schmortion plotline. I don't think she is shown once interacting with Nate in season 1. Not once! At the very least, I would give it credit if they show them all hanging out and maybe she's being a little weird in season 1 where she kind of wants his attention too, and she's just one of those types of girls that even if it's a guy with a girlfriend that she wants to get his attention to. You know, if there was some kind of inkling like that, that would have been great. But yeah, there was no setup for this. It's a good build. They have Maddy being suspicious of it. That whole jacuzzi scene was just, or hot tub. That whole hot tub scene was just, so tense and so good up until the point that Cassie pukes all over. Up until that point, I was having a good time watching the tension and that Maddy was picking up. She was like, why did you say it so quick, Nate? Why did you say it so definitively that we're not together? Why did you say it like that? So good. The build up to that. And then leading up to the moment where Maddy finds out about it. And then the follow through where Maddy beats her ass on stage and then some. Whew, it was good. I just feel like when Cassie's case, they could have explored her need for male validation separately and either introduce a new character or just something so that at the very least maybe she can actually grow and learn and know that she doesn't need the male validation and that she can actually find love in herself. I think that would have been the most, maybe with the way I'm saying it, it's corny, but it would have made the most sense in terms of if you want to see a character growth and you want to see a lesson learned, like how Rue learns a lesson this season. I would have appreciated if Cassie comes out of it learning, yeah, I just need to be alone, and I did some fucked up things, and I need to be by myself and learn how to love myself first before I let anybody else love my body with the way I love my body. You know, just something, but no. In terms of Maddy too, because really this plotline is part of Maddy, but then they don't really have Maddy doing anything either this season. And then what I was going to mention about the whole adult-minor relationships, funny enough, actually not funny, but interesting enough, her whole plotline is revolving around babysitting for this rich lady, right? She looks like she's in her mid to late 30s, but an adult, right? And so then they have an interesting dynamic where it felt like it was leading sexual, but it never did. And there's a up-close scene where she's doing her dress, and it just felt like there was some tension there, but nothing happens with it. And they end up bonding later in this pool, and then they end up talking about best friends and banging best friends' boyfriends. And she ends up seemingly to be more of just a mentor for Maddy and someone who helps Maddy through this problem, which is good. But then turns out there was reports that Sam Levinson did initially intend for this to be sexual and that they were supposed to have some kind of relationship with each other. So, ew. What is with the adults and minors? Stop, because this woman is an adult. She's an adult. If you want to have Maddy explore her sexuality, have her explore it with someone that's her age. Please. Thankfully, I don't know who complained. I don't know what happened, but yeah, that didn't end up making the cut, which was good. But you could tell that it was leading that way. Obviously, since that doesn't happen, it doesn't seem like much happens with Maddy and her storyline this season, which was also a shame because, yeah, I would have liked to have had her learn and grow from being away from Nate, because unfortunately she does still try to get back together with him without knowing that he's banging Cassie, and before she knows that, obviously afterwards she doesn't want anything to do with him, but before that, yeah, she's still in Duluth and wanting to get back together with him, and in my humble opinion, that was such a disservice to the character. I get it, it's hard to step away from your abuser and recognize that, but have her somehow learn that she is getting abused, and to get out of this toxic cycle of abuse, somehow learn it, and not through knowing that her best friend's sleeping with her ex, because that's not enough. That's not her realizing that it was the abuse and that she needs to get away from an abusive relationship. That's just her being spiteful because he banged her best friend. So I would have preferred them explore in Maddy's character that, and how you can learn that you deserve a love that's pure and healthy and not abusive, and recognize those flags and know how to step away from those flags. Just something. Have her learn it either through another character, have her learn it through a different experience, or maybe she does end up going to something, right? But they just had her fucking babysitting this whole season. And like, what is she learning from that? And then lastly, obviously, we have Drew and her addiction and that plotline. And again, that's like the only thing that does end up being a good plotline throughout both of these seasons, and a well-developed storyline, and actually having Rue learn things through this. And thankfully, that was well done. I will give Sam Levinson his credit for that, but again, it's like the only thing that gets well done in this show is Rue. For Rue's plotline, unfortunately, as we see that she relapsed at the end of season 1, and she continues to take drugs at the beginning of season 2. Since New Year's, she finds this new friend, Elliot. That's his name, Elliot. Oh my god, how did I remember that? Dominic Fike! They end up bonding and taking a lot of drugs together, and then she's trying to hide that the whole time from Jules, and then Jules ends up finding out, which ends up leading to this very explosive moment between her mom and Jules, and even Gia. Amazing acted scene. I knew from this scene Zendaya was gonna get her Emmy. Yeah, she worked for that Emmy, okay? We got her snotting it up everywhere, trying to eat a Jolly Rancher when she's trying to be sober. It's It's hectic. Completely well done. Definitely well done with the acting, with the way that she just freaks out at her mom when her mom finds out that she's still using. Just exactly what someone with addiction turns out, and showing the harsh sides of that and how it can turn a person into someone who they're not and a bad version of themselves. It's exactly shown through Rue, and it's just very unfortunate and sad for those with addiction, but it does happen, and you have to try your best to try and help those people if it's someone that's close to you in your life. I felt that for Jules too, that even if Jules did cheat on Rue, she still loves her and she still feels for her and wants the best for her, doesn't want her to be addicted anymore, wants her to be clean. And so it's really sad. It is really sad, but it was, yeah. Well. Lee ended up trying to help Rue too. He ends up coming and meeting her family, and then she ends up ruining that relationship with him at first too, because she's using, and again, she's a bad version of herself when she's using. And so I love seeing that, how that affects the relationships around her. And then getting the full circle moment of her getting help, trying to be clean. It was also brutal seeing her struggling, going through withdrawals. Multiple times she was going through withdrawals this season, because in Lori's house, running that whole episode. I will say I didn't appreciate the whole running episode, because in my humble opinion, they kind of wasted a bunch of time with that. Rue's just kind of running the whole episode. Her mom is trying to take her to get help, to go to rehab, and then she runs out of the car and then is just running around the whole episode. Eventually finds her way to Lori's place and thankfully escapes, because yeah, it's very dangerous to get twisted in Lori's world, as we come to find later on in season 3. Thankfully she ends up escaping that, but this is the whole episode. It felt too long, in my humble opinion, of her just running around. Personally. But after that, when they show her that she is back with her family and she is struggling but trying to get clean, she apologizes to Ali, which was such a beautiful moment. And then finally, by the end, she says bye to Jules, and then in her narration says that she stayed clean for herself and, did that for her, which is perfect and felt like a very growth, healthy, full circle, well-developed plotline moment. And could have ended there, honestly, with that. In terms of Rue's journey, we could have ended there, I personally feel like, because yes, she still technically owes Lori money, and that does come into play in season 3, but I do like the fact of having her narrate and saying that she stayed clean and that Jules was her first high school love, but realizing that that was a high school love, just like Ali was saying in season 1, and that it sounds like she has learned and grown to be separate from Jules, and that she needs to do these things for herself, for her family, and not just latch on to a person, not latch on to the next thing to be addicted to and potentially use as your crutch. That's your main source of happiness. You have to have other things that make you happy in your life, and not just rely on one person to be your happiness, or one thing, as she was relying on drugs to be her happiness. And yeah, she finally learned. She finally learned by the end of that season. And so that was a great journey. Rue and her journey was fabulous. By the end of season 2, awesome. And then also in terms of Maddy, there's this whole plot, but it's a subplot, and they don't really do much with this either, with her getting a recording. It's Jules and Cal back from season 1, and Cal's wondering where this is, because if Maddy exposes it could ruin Cal's life. And so Nate ends up playing Russian roulette with her to get it back, but nicely gives it back to Jules, so Jules can do whatever with it, what she wants. And then he ends up throwing his dad in jail anyways by the end of the season. So, but it felt like by the end of the season, when she got that tape, that it was going to be a big role in season 2, but then it doesn't. And then Nate literally just takes it back, gives it to Jules, and then sends his dad in jail anyway. It was pointless to me. Also to note that they changed cinematography in season 2, where they shot it totally in film. In my humble opinion, even though it does look good, I do appreciate film and the look of film. I personally prefer season 1 aesthetic. To me, it just took the character out of it, because season 1 was very much those neon colors, and it looked a certain way with that cinematography and the way that they would spin the camera, all these things, right? And so for me, it felt a little off to have it be in film and have it have this kind of yellowy, greeny color grading throughout the entire season instead of the bright neon colors that season 1 was. And season 1, like I said, when you think of Euphoria, you think of that aesthetic. You think of that original season 1 aesthetic. But then they got rid of it for season 2, and in my opinion, they shouldn't have, because that's what it's known for, right? That's the core Euphoria and the brand that you've built for Euphoria. So why would you change it for season 2, right? Can I also highlight beautiful moment? It actually made me cry. Ooh, the second time around that I've watched this now, that made me cry. Labyrinth's music, again, stands point, legendary. Amazing, fantastic, brilliant, because that song that he did, I'm Tired, when they show it in that episode, she's high on drugs, and then they show Labyrinth singing to her in the church, and then she's clinging on to her dad. Oh, and then they do the shot of her dancing alone in her apartment. Ooh, chills. And with the song, that was fantastically done. That was a moment. That was a gorgeous scene. I don't want to hear anything about it. That was such an emotionally high driven scene. My emotional bandwidth can only take so much. And then also the way they explore her relationship with her dad and how this obviously did affect her so much with her drug usage, showing her speech at his funeral. And with that scene with her clinging on to her dad, we know that the drug usage is attributed to her losing her dad. And it's just that much more tragic. At the end of the day, it's just a girl who misses her dad. And it's so sad. And we get into the last season. This could have been a great wrap up in season 2, right? It could have been, but everybody was curious. What does Sam Levinson have up his sleeve to wrap up these characters for season 3? Now that they're adults, he ended up making a frickin' Tarantino movie with his Euphoria characters. That's what he decided to do for season 3. Everybody noted this. It was just so obvious, especially this one scene. I swear to you, when I was watching this, because I've seen Django Unchained so many times, I'm like, this is exactly that scene from Django Unchained. The inspiration was heavy in this season. I think it was still filmed on film, even though I could be wrong, but they made the aesthetic look completely, those movies that try to make Mexico look all orange and yellow, that's exactly the type of aesthetic he tried to do for this season. And I thought to myself, okay, well, and then she ends up crossing over to Mexico, and it's just, I will say, for this season, and this might sound controversial, but I'm going to say this. In terms of this being a continuation of the past 2 seasons with these characters, was this done well? No, absolutely not. In terms of wrapping up these characters in a smart, thoughtful way? No. Did it make for an entertaining season of television? Yes. If you were to look at this season as a standalone season, without thinking about this being a continuation of the last 2 seasons of Euphoria, I will admit, as a standalone, this is pretty fun. I'll say that. And you know why I say that? Because someone like my father, who doesn't give 2 shits about teenage shows, mind you, started watching Euphoria in the middle of season 3 and said to me, wow, this is actually really fun. This is actually really interesting. I'm really into this show. Oh, so much so that I ended up watching the finale with my dad. And he told me by the end of the season that he enjoyed it. He's now dealing with drug lords and strippers and pimps and yes, this is exactly where Sam Levinson would thrive, 100%. Should he have done it with his Euphoria characters? Probably not. Make your own separate show Sam Levinson. Make your own separate movie, Sam Levinson. And I think if he had proper writers and the proper writing team, he could be unstoppable as a director. Unfortunately, to his detriment, as I mentioned earlier, for him as a writer, he thrives on humiliating women and continues to humiliate women even more so this season. Ooh. If you thought it was bad before, oh baby, it gets even worse. Now that they're adults, Sam Levinson was like, fuck it, I'm gonna have them doing everything and anything. Cassie's gonna dress like a little baby and spread eagle. Ew! I'm gonna have her tits be gigantic, pressed up against a window like Godzilla. What? Immediately in the first episode, you know he's out to humiliate these bitches because he has Rue and Faye shitting out their ass, little drug baggies, into a pasta strainer, and then using that same strainer to cook pasta and eat from there in the same episode. Literal shit dripping down Faye's leg. Was there any reason for that? Was there there was no reason for it. This was just embarrassing. This was just embarrassing to both Zendaya and Faye. I'm sorry, I forget the actress's name that plays Faye, but it was an embarrassment to them both. You could not have me paid that much to do this shit. To shit out this shit. Similarly so, there's Alamo, that he's a pimp, and he owns a strip club, and there's numerous scenes with strippers stripping for why. This also felt like he just was doing it to do it. Because it turns out, we find out eventually that the guy Alamo, he ends up being the big bad of the season, that Rue ends up working for him. He's also human trafficking, which is terrible. And we get this baby story, this very underdeveloped story of this stripper who ends up kind of having a thing with Rue. She ends up getting emotional when she finds out that one of her friends died, and then she ends up being supposedly a liability to Alamo, so then he has her shipped off to what's supposed to be a rehab facility, but we immediately know as the audience that this is not a rehab facility. They got an up-close shot of the front desk lady's nails that are all dirty, and we know this is sketch. But yet, Rue still leaves her there. We don't find out until the very end of the season that it's confirmed that he is human trafficking, but then nothing comes from it. Like, we just know that he's a shitty guy and is doing this shitty thing, but that's it. I thought maybe it was setting up for that one of our main girls was going to be in danger of being trafficked, which, yeah, that would have been very dark, extremely dark, but why have it in there for the purpose of just having it in there? It's just showing, yeah, human traffickers exist, unfortunately, terribly so, but at the end, he ends up getting shot for a different reason. He ends up dying for a completely different reason. So, what was the point? What was actually the point of showing all of that? Because you could have had something very emotional had you focused in on the character that got trafficked, which was this Latina, and she's a really amazing actress too. Apparently she's done other work before this too, and she has the chops, you can tell. And so you have this wonderful actress at your disposal where you could do the whole backstory, and they do show a couple backstories like we did get in season 1, but then they didn't do it for her. Which, in my opinion, that would have been so powerful. That's such a missed opportunity that you could have done that for her to showcase this is a human. Give her more of that connection with us as the audience to know that she's just a person at the end of the day and that she had a hard life growing up or something, how she ended up being here in the first place. And then have it tie in that she has a family out there that still loves her and wants her to come home or something. And so then just making it that much more impactful that she ended up getting terribly trafficked, never to be seen again, and that her family, that impact of the people around her wasn't that personal touch, that personal connection to have for this storyline. And it was so needed because this is something that it's a terrible, horrendous, serious issue. And if Sam Levinson wanted to highlight it, he could have done it in such a smarter, clever way. It just goes back to my point. I know I kind of went off a tangent here, but it goes back to my point of him just not caring about the women in this show. It truly feels that way by this point, and I have to point it out, because you have these that they're strippers, and there's even another one that she undergoes this traumatic experience, assaulted essentially, and Rue checks in on her to see if she's okay, but then that's it, and then she ends up just being fine and getting a BBL by the end of the season. He just doesn't take these women seriously. And I wish he did, because there is a lot to be said in sex work. There is a lot to be said in this industry, and then especially with human trafficking. It's a terrible, horrendous thing. He just shows these women going through stress, going through terrible times, going through violations, being humiliated, all of these things, and with nothing to say, with nothing to be said, and nothing meaningful there. At the end of the day, it just feels like you're putting some fetishes on your screen, to be honest, when you don't have anything meaningful to say. Like, you're just putting it just to put it. And that sucks. The fact that every single one of his female characters, except for Lexi, I guess you could say, but Lexi was always kind of a side character anyway, for having your main female characters all be part of sex work in some way in the season was just... it was just not necessary. Cassie as an OnlyFans star. You have Maddy, who's trying to manage Cassie and anyone she can as OnlyFans stars. You have Jules, who's full out a sugar baby. And then Rue, who's now working for Alamo, who's in that business with the strippers and pimping people out, even though Rue doesn't know about the human trafficking part, but she's part of that world. It felt gross, and I'm not trying to shame. I'm not trying to shame sex work. I know there's so much to be said about it, and to be mindful and to be understanding. There's a lot, right? But that's what I mean, that he just didn't do anything in a mindful way with any of these topics. He's not the person that should have been handling these topics. You have Cassie in the first few episodes that they show her being a dog, for her only shaking her ass with a tail. Like I said, spread eagle in a baby costume, in a diaper. All of these scenes with her that I just thought to myself, Sydney Sweeney, why did you do this? Girl, stand up. Girl, how much are they paying you for this? I am personally not super familiar with OnlyFans, in the sense of I don't know what content's on there, but I can humbly almost guarantee that it's not all that type of bullshit. I'm pretty sure there's OnlyFans stars who just do simple, those kinds of videos, but like without dressing up as a dog or a baby or anything like that, you know? I'm sure there are people who do that, but I'm sure there's plenty of others that don't. So it was just not needed. Later on, too, there's a whole 10-minute segment montage of her whispering in this microphone ear and sending farts to men and being a Godzilla with her tits out. It's just... Then you have Jules, who's a sugar baby, and he literally does nothing with this. She finds herself in a situation where she fully commits herself to this man who has a family. He has a wife and kid, I think he said. I know he has a wife for sure, but she ends up being in his penthouse that he has set up for her because they bang, and then that's her man that she's seeing, I guess, and she's totally fine with it. And that's it. And she paints. By the time, too, with Cassie, by the time we reach the finale, she's basically at the same spot that she was to begin with, where she started off as an OnlyFans star at the beginning of the season, and she ends up as an OnlyFans star at the end of the season. I think that he tried to paint it out to be that she's lonely in this big house, and that she's not actually really happy with being an OnlyFans star, I guess, with just this one shot, but it really wasn't enough. It truly was not nearly enough when you've shown her just being humiliated constantly throughout the season, also with trying to get this famous guy's attention and trying to put her in an incriminating way so that that can explode and blow up on Instagram and social media. There was just so much that they did with showing her doing OnlyFans, but nothing, again, to be said about it. Just, God. Just consistently humiliating women in this show, and it's just very frustrating and very annoying. That's just one complaint. This season is a mess, okay? Also to note, in terms of musical score, whatever the fuck happened to Labyrinth and Sam Levinson, can I just say, R.I.P., what a shame. Sam Levinson, you should have been groveling at this man's feet for his music because it's so missed, and everybody could tell. Everybody noted this. Hans Zimmer is an icon, a legend, but his score just simply, it didn't do it. It didn't do it in terms of Euphoria. Labyrinth had his own personality to it and added the Euphoria flair that is so iconically Euphoria now. Very beautiful moving pieces that he would create for Euphoria, and then it was severely missed. Severely missed the season. What a shame. I will forever stand by that it sounded like Maddy was entering some kind of mermaid ocean, some kind of cheesy-ass mermaid ocean when she was entering Cassie and Nate's wedding. The fuck was that score? Now in terms of the continuation for the characters. Okay. I'm going to leave Rue for last, as I usually do. In terms of Cassie, as we were talking about, let's go with Cassie and Nate, actually, since they kind of go as a pair. She starts off as an OnlyFans model and trying to do that for a living. Nate finds out about it and politely asks no, don't do this. And it turns out that they're engaged. They're going to be married soon. And she wants a fuck ton of flowers. So much so that it costs $50,000. Nate politely asks her, no, that's insane. I'm not doing that. She then counters, well, if I find the money, can I get it? And he says, okay, well, how are you going to do that? And then kind of brushes off the fact that she's going to keep doing OnlyFans to do that. Then their friends find out that she's on OnlyFans, and it seems humiliating for Nate. But then he still politely asks her, please delete that. And she says that only if she can get her flowers from that. He says, fine. They get married. And she starts yelling at him because it turns out that he's broke and owes a lot of people a lot of money. In particular, this really angry Armenian gangster guy who ruins their wedding and says it and exposes him for that at the wedding. She starts yelling at him and blows a cork in his face. And he politely tells her in their limo that he's gonna get the money and provide for them and that he loves her. You see where I'm going with this? She continues her OnlyFans, ends up meeting up with Maddy so that she can manage her and her OnlyFans. Nate eventually gets consistently beat up from the Armenian guy and his henchmen and consistently gets toes, fingers, what have you, cut off until he gets him all the money that he owes. And then Cassie continues doing OnlyFans so that she could also give Nate that money that he owes. Eventually, it's still not enough, and the guy ends up burying Nate alive. And there's one peephole that he has that a rattlesnake goes in and ends up killing Nate. And then Cassie ends up asking Maddy for help because the Armenian guy also has her hostage and is going to kill her if she doesn't come up with the money somehow. And so then Maddy enlists Alamo's help. She ends up getting into business with Alamo. We'll talk more about that later. And so then Alamo ends up killing the Armenian guy. And then now Cassie and Maddy are fully in debt to Alamo. And they find out that Nate actually died. So this was kind of for nothing. And then Cassie eventually ends up just being alone in this big house, doing her OnlyFans still. And that's basically the end of Cassie and Nate. So a lot to unpack here. First of all, who the fuck gave Nate Jacobs a lobotomy? Because who is this man? Who is this man? What the fuck? Okay, when we started this season, I truly thought to myself, okay, they're building up for him to explode. They're building up for Nate to explode on Cassie at one point. At one point, it's going to come out and it's going to be insane. This has all been an act or all him just keeping it all bottled in as best as he can, but it's going to happen. The explosion is going to happen. And then I was waiting. And then I kept waiting. And then I kept waiting. And then it never fucking happened. And he just ends up dying. What? Why the fuck did Sam Levinson write him like this? I don't understand. It's so unearned, because if you're gonna have Nate Jacobs be this polite, mindful, soft-spoken man that doesn't get enraged anymore, can you at least give us a backstory on how he progressed to being this way? If you're gonna have him actually be a mature man now? Like, what? Again, it was so weird because there were certain episodes where there was a backstory for people. They had a little intro for Maddy, but not really, but just a little bit on how she ended up working for a certain woman that's in the talent business and the Hollywood business. They had intro for Alamo and his backstory. They had a backstory for Ali, but then for whatever reason, they chose not to do one for Nate. And you know what would have been so great to seeing? What were their years like prior to this moment? What happened in between high school to now is what I would have liked to have seen. Sam Levinson. Why didn't we get that from any of them? But it made so much more sense because we're left to just not know and figure it out for ourselves, even though there's no indication or explanation. We have no clue why Nate is this way. They don't even attempt to explain it. So how did he become this way? How did he get here? It's just so unfair to have your character do a complete 180 without getting any kind of development or indication on how he got here. Especially for a character like Nate. Especially for someone who was as fucked up as he was in high school. Yes, you can assume people change as they grow and mature, but there's experiences that they have that get them there and that get them to change. So why didn't we get any? What kind of scarecrow ass brain did you put in Nate Jacobs? I get it. The abuser becomes abused. Sure, that he ended up getting his fingers and toes chopped off. Sure, you could argue that he deserved that because he was abusing people in high school, particularly Maddy. So now he's getting abuse. 10 toes down, deserves that, that comes full circle. I guess you could say that, but how we got here also just felt very random and very out of place. That he ends up being a developer, which, yeah, that makes sense because he took over his dad's business. That makes sense. But then that he owes people money now and that it ended up being a really intimidating gangster guy. And that gangster guy ended up killing him fully. People say that he didn't deserve to die. There's some people that argue that. I would say I agree because in terms of the shit that he's done, yeah, he's done some really fucked up shit, but does that mean he deserves to die? No. I was good enough with the abuse, but to have him fully die and killed off, I can see that. I can see why people were not thinking that was right for his ending. I can agree. I'll admit, though, I was excited about it. I'll say that. It was a brutal way to die. Insane way to die. Satisfying to me because he was such a piece of shit. There was so much else you could have done with his character. The whole sexuality plotline was just completely dropped. Obviously, there was some kind of internalized homophobia that he had with himself, but it's just never explored, ever. It was kind of hinted at in season 2, especially at the end with the I need a hero piece. But then he's just this normal suburban white guy in his suburban white home with his suburban white wife. And that's it. And then he just owes people money. He gets tortured and then killed. That's it. I would have had it at the very least if you wanted him to learn and grow. Sure, show him have remorse. Show him go to therapy. Show him interact with Maddy. He doesn't even interact with Maddy at all. He interacts with Jules, but not Maddy? Really? And she showed up to his wedding. What? I wouldn't have even have had him end up with Cassie, to be honest, because they left season 2, that they broke up. But then obviously there was the indication that it was a cycle and that the abuse toxic cycle was going to repeat. But then they don't show them being toxic in the future. They don't show that cycle continuing with them in the future. So it felt so out of place. With him just being this supposed loving husband, fiance for her, That's not my name. Either have him fully realize his sexuality, either while being with Cassie, or that he's not with Cassie and in the future he's just trying to realize and come into full fruition with that. And once he comes to full fruition with that, then he can not have so much anger anymore, and maybe having him heal and having peace, being away from his dad, just something, you know? There could have been a lot that made sense with his character, but yeah, no, this was goofy, is what it was. Then we have Cassie, like I said, with her whole OnlyFans thing. I don't know, she was just desperate for attention, but then they have her hyper focused on being famous, which was weird to me because she was always about male validation. That was always her thing from season 1. And season 2, you could argue that kind of continues with Nate. You would think that then they would explore that more, that in the future, she's then in a relationship and engaged to a guy that she's in constant need of his validation, and just continuing that until maybe she breaks that cycle and then again just chooses to be on her own and chooses to be happy single, and then that can be her whole through line for the future. But yeah, the whole OnlyFans thing was just, especially season 1 Cassie, that it just feels like a total 180. She was embarrassed and she was crying knowing that people were watching the videos that were being sent about her. That Cassie, it just feels completely out of pocket that she would ever want people to pass around now her OnlyFans, and that she's doing that for the world. You know? At her core, she wanted a partner to love her. She wanted to feel loved, was part of it. She's actually kind of similar to Jules in that way in her character, is that she just wants to be loved and adored. And even she says it to Maddy too in season 2. You deserve someone who adores you and is passionate about you, all these things, but yet they have her be a mockery of herself almost by going on to OnlyFans. And then she wants to be in Hollywood and be famous in Hollywood. So to me, it wasn't the same as what they've established in season 1 for her character, where in season 1, if she wanted the attention of everybody, then they would have had her try to get the attention of everybody, but that wasn't the case. That wasn't what she wanted. And so it just feels very out of left field to have her actually be OnlyFans, if you think about it. Again, it just felt like Sam Levinson's way of humiliating her. Shock value for the purpose of shock value. That's how it felt. And her ending up empty, alone in the house. Sure, yeah, she's still empty. She's still alone. It ended up making me feel empty. What was the reason of showing her Godzilla tits? What was the reason of showing her spread eagle as a baby? What was the reason of showing her trying to get famous and going after famous guys and getting photographs and having sex with famous guys for the world to see so that she could be famous? What was the point? What was the point? And being so money hungry and money driven. It was so weird. Then you have Maddy, and her character, in my humble opinion, also made no fucking sense, because when was she ever established to wanting to manage people? I personally don't think it makes sense with her character. You could argue with me on that, but to me, I actually thought it would have made more sense if she would do something in the fashion industry, because they established that she really loved seeing that woman's clothes, the one that she was babysitting for in season 2. She was trying on all these clothes, and she's always been really fashion forward too. So I thought that would make the most sense for her future career if she were to choose a career, because also, if you guys don't remember, in season 1, with her whole intro, she said that she saw women who were getting pampered, the ones who were seated at the salons, and she wanted to be that person. She wanted to be the woman who was doing nothing and hated to admit to herself, but she wanted to do nothing and had no motivation and no passion for anything. That was established, and it's fine if you wanted to change that. But with that establishment, honestly, I thought it would make the most sense for Maddy to be a housewife. Honestly, if anything, from that establishment. For me, actually, it didn't really suit her to just do nothing and sit around doing nothing. But anyway, she ended up somehow being involved in talent and trying to manage talent. And it just felt very forced. And that Sam Levinson was just trying to tie her to Hollywood because Lexi's in Hollywood. Lexi being in Hollywood makes sense because she is known to writing and liking to write, and she wrote the whole play. She's a creative. So that makes sense for Lexi. It doesn't make sense for Maddy. When did she ever showcase that she's interested in Hollywood? no. Or being interested in managing people. And then she particularly wants to manage OnlyFans models because there's a lot of money involved in it. But then, I mean, there's a lot of money involved in a lot of things. So again, it just felt very hacked on and very forced into her character, and that they made her do this so that she could reestablish her friendship with Cassie and then be involved with Cassie in that way, because Cassie wants to be OnlyFans and then she wants to manage. So it just felt forced so that could happen, is what it felt like. It's just too convenient, right? How convenient is it that Maddy wants to manage OnlyFans models and then Cassie wants to be an OnlyFans model? And then, even worse, you have her attending Cassie and Nate's wedding. And then you have her walking off as if she's sad about it and looking at their table as if she's sad about it. So then you're left to thinking, okay, is she going to do something? Because she's reopening this door with Cassie. And it's very heavily implied that they wouldn't ever be friends again. In normal human life, you wouldn't be friends with someone who fucked your ex. In Maddy and Cassie's circumstance of how close they were and how close Maddy was with Nate, and that they were trying to get back together in her head, yeah, you wouldn't be friends with someone like that in the future. So here I was, and I thought the whole audience was thinking that she was going to end up fucking Cassie over somehow, right? That somehow that she had this whole master plan, she was going to fuck her over somehow, and it was going to be this crazy moment of revenge from Maddy's end, because at one point, while she's managing Cassie, she whips out a contract, and we see that Cassie doesn't even bother to read it and just hastily signs it without even reading it. So many people are having these theories online that Maddy was going to fuck her over somehow with that contract, and that Maddy somehow put something in there that was going to fuck Cassie over and then probably make her so that she gives all the money to Maddy, or just something, right? Because they clearly show that Cassie doesn't read through it and signs it. You see her signature and everything. With Maddy being established as a character to being vindictive in earlier seasons, and that she seems to be the type to plot, you would think that she's plotting this entire time against Cassie, and that she has beef with her and still wants to take revenge over what she did to her. But no, actually nothing ends up happening. And Maddy doesn't take revenge in any way. She truly was just trying to make money off Cassie fairly and profiting off Cassie, but while Cassie also gets her fair share of the money, and that's it. It's just so weird. It's so bizarre. It felt so out of character because, as I said, we've established Maddy to being vindictive, and again, it would be different if we saw a whole montage of her from high school to now, and that maybe she ended up being more of a healed person, something, right? But no. And then, even stupider, again, it just felt so out of place for Maddy, and it just so felt like for plot convenience, she ends up talking with Alamo, who's Rue's boss, the pimp, the drug dealer guy, and she knows that Rue is working for this guy and that he's in that shady business because Rue has told her this, that her boss is a drug dealer, or essentially tells her that he's a drug dealer. So she knows this, okay? And yet, even with Rue telling her that she should go, oh, Maddy, didn't you have that thing that you had to go to? You told me you had to go. She's trying to get Maddy out of there and obviously warn her to leave, and Maddy decides to stay. She firmly plans that she's going to stay and talk to Alamo herself, and then pitches her idea so that she can help manage his girls and gets them in on a cut for OnlyFans, and that they get in business together. Which, why would you do that? Why would you do that? I know that was intentional on her end, but that's stupid, dude. You know that this is shady business. Why are you involving yourself in that? Again, it just made no sense to me for her character. And then, even more dumb brain cells, eventually, she gets in that situation where she's trying to help Cassie with the whole trying to get the money to bail out Nate, because now the Armenian guy has Cassie hostage. So then she asks Alamo for help, and then she blurts out to Alamo that Rue is working with some kind of DEA business, and outs Rue for working with the DEA? What? It made no sense for her and her character. She knows better. She knows better. She knows that Rue is working for Alamo. Why would you say that? Why would you say it? Just made there was no reason for her to say that other than to move the plot forward. And she ends up supposedly sleeping with Alamo. It's heavily implied. She ends up indebted to him now, and then thankfully gets saved because he ends up getting killed at the end, so she's free to go. But then she doesn't have any real closure to her or her character at all. There was nothing about abuse, because, again, she's a survivor of abuse from Nate, so they didn't do anything with that. She felt like an accessory for Cassie and Rue's plotline, is what it felt like. That they just needed to tie her in somehow to Cassie and Rue, and that's how they did it. I also hated the way that they wrote her character this season. It just also made no sense with the continuation of her, closing her out. That's unfortunate. Jules, 2 words. Waste of time. I guess that's 3. Oh my god. I don't know if Hunter Schafer got paid big or what the deal was with this one, to be honest, but she didn't even need to be there. As much as, again, I would have loved to explored more, would have loved to have gotten deeper into it, but they don't give her anything. And she literally is just shown being a sugar baby, then landing with this guy that she ends up liking, but then he puts her in a penthouse, and then it's a secret relationship because he has a wife, and he establishes that too multiple times to her that, hey, this isn't getting out, by the way. You're just my side piece, essentially, that he says to her, and she just stays that way. Ends up painting for Lexi at one point. That goes terribly. That was something else. I won't even talk about that. That was just annoying. And then she ends up fighting with Rue for no reason before she dies. And then she just is shown staying at her place, painting Rue, and is still in the penthouse, still with that guy, and that's literally it. That's literally all they have for Jules. It's just such a shame, to be honest, because for having a trans character in your show, you can do the representation so amazingly well. You know, that could mean so much to so many people, but yet you reduced her to just being a sugar baby and a painter, and that's it. That's literally all it is. She was useless. Useless. Terrible closing out to her character. There was no reason for her to be there. Let's just say that Lexi, it makes sense for her to end up in Hollywood. Actually, I would say of all the characters, they ended up having her as the side character make the most sense with her plotline this season. Now with Rue, we have this whole her and this drug feud, and then getting involved with the DA. Rue's core was always being clean and trying to stay sober, and her drug addiction struggles. And unfortunately, this took away from that. You have kind of full circle at the end with her character. I would say that her character, as much as I don't agree with how she died, I think it makes sense for her character to die, but the way they did it, it was not too sure about that, but we'll get to it. But basically, with her and her plotline, I actually feel like it was well developed enough and closed out well by the end of season 2 that this continuation didn't need to happen. It was more for the dramatics and the theatrics of the season, and that you wanted a Quentin Tarantino movie. That's really what it felt like for Rue's plotline. It didn't feel as natural. I think with getting involved with Lori made sense, but the whole rest of it just felt very much like, yeah, this is for Hollywood movie purposes. This doesn't feel real. She eventually gets found by Lori, and she owes her a shit ton of money because from the initial, I think it was like $20,000 that she owed her or something from the case of drug that her mom accidentally flushed away. It's been years now, and so Lori's collecting an interest fee, unfortunately. This ends up making her debt to Lori over, what is it, $100 million or some shit. So essentially, she's forever indebted to Lori. To me, that actually did make sense that she was found by Lori, and that now she has to, unfortunately, pay off that debt. But then it would have been more natural, obviously, if she worked and they did maybe a flash forward where you see her working for years for Lori, and then eventually either, yes, getting involved with the DEA specifically regarding Lori, though, or that somehow in the crossfires with Lori, she does end up dying from either relapsing, a couple of her drug deliveries that she ends up meeting someone, and then they end up persuading her to trying drugs again, and then she's struggling with that and then ends up dying because of that. I thought that would have been more natural, but the whole introduction with Alamo definitely felt more Hollywood and movie-like, because what are the odds that she ends up making a delivery to a pimp and then ends up convincing that pimp to let her work for him, and then he says, yes, you can work for me, and then Lori is mad about it, but then doesn't kill Rue for that, because you would think that she would probably kill Rue for that, maybe? I would think, I don't know, but there's that, and then it just ends up being this back and forth thing where it's more between Alamo and Lori, and then eventually Rue gets mixed up with the DEA, that they find out that she is involved with these people, and so then she works for them so that she can hopefully get her freedom. And it's just more of the same, honestly. It did feel a little repetitive, I'm not gonna lie, for a few episodes there, where it was just this constant back and forth. Alamo pissed off Lori, and then now Lori pissed off Alamo, and now there's pigs everywhere, and then he killed her parent. It felt more between those characters than Rue, which is unfortunate, because again, Rue is the heart of the show, and you had a really well-developed character in your first 2 seasons, so why wouldn't you continue trying to focus on her rather than these new characters? I know Lori isn't new, but a lot of the other characters are new, and this whole Hollywoodized drug war between these two, because that felt more of the center with this season rather than Rue. And so that's unfortunate, because she, again, was the heart of the show. And I think my idea with having it be more so about her specifically with Lori, working for Lori, but then she somehow ends up unfortunately relapsing, because it is an unfortunate thing. And in that case, I do think Sam Levinson should have showcased this, because unfortunately, yes, there are those that do get clean, but there are those who don't. And very terribly so, tragically so, end up dying because of this. And so that could have been a very important spotlight on drug addiction, and how at the end of the day, there are people who struggle to stay clean and unfortunately undergo the tragedy of dying because they just could not stay clean. And that definitely would have hit me for sure and impacted me for Rue's character. I have a personal story when it comes to someone that I love dearly that underwent a struggle similarly to Rue. And so for me, that representation and seeing how that was explored for the first 2 seasons anyway was huge. And so I feel like that would have been very impactful to have it drawn out that way, more focused on her and her journey and the unfortunate downfall, if you were to have the unfortunate downfall, and have that impact your audience of the tragedies that is in our everyday lives, that there are a lot of people who are lost due to drug addiction, and that there needs to be more out there to help. There was even too this really impactful scene in season 2 where the mom is calling to get Rue back into rehab, and they won't take her, because that's true too. There's rehab facilities that I know as well that they're either too expensive or they're too booked up. There's not enough of them. And so that's another thing that, if you would have shed more light on that. Instead, they have that back and forth drug war between these two, Rue in the middle of it, and that she's staying clean in the middle of it. But then, very tragically so, because Maddy fucking spilled the beans for whatever the fuck reason, that she's working with the DEA, to Alamo. And then Alamo takes it into his own hands. He gives her these pain medication, these painkillers that's supposed to be painkillers, but then laces it with fentanyl. So then even if she takes, I believe she just takes one, she ends up dying from that. And that is a crisis. What I don't like about that is the fact that she was killed. She was purposely killed, purposely murdered. Because had she just take one painkiller, that's a normal painkiller, I believe she would be fine. She'd be fine. They showed too that the whole bottle was full. She didn't try to take more than what was necessary. She just took, I believe, one. But that ended up being her demise because Alamo tricked it and he laced it with fentanyl, which is a callback to the beginning of the season. But that wasn't Rue's fault. I do agree that I see Rue dying and that it makes sense for her character to die, unfortunately. I thought that felt unearned with Alamo being the one to purposely kill her with fentanyl, and that wasn't her choice of overdosing. Like, she didn't choose to take a bunch of pills and overdose, right? It was just supposed to be the one thing to help her pain, and that was it. So I don't know. To me, that's my issue with it. That if you wanted to say something about drug addicts and addiction, then it should have been Rue consciously making that decision of taking a lot of drugs that made her OD, is what I thought. You have that character killed, though. And you could say maybe it's earned because she ended up being mixed in this business and it's dangerous and she had it coming that she was going to get killed either way otherwise. Sure, I can agree to that, but still, I think at the core, Sam Levinson missed it, that this was supposed to be a story about someone struggling with addiction. And so if you wanted to make a lasting impact and say something about it and show people the tragedy of this, then you should have had her be the one to make that conscious decision and not have her accidentally not know that this was laced with fentanyl and accidentally die, is what I thought. But anyway, that's my thoughts on that. When they show her dying too, it's just really tragic that, you know, she thinks Fez is out of jail and then she visits her home and she's hugging her dad. I thought it would have made the most sense, though, to show at least some kind of ocean imagery. I don't know if you guys were paying attention, but she did say something along the lines of wanting the waves to take her and just being attracted to the ocean, and a lot of ocean references on her end. So I thought it would have made sense to at least show that imagery at one point, but they didn't. But it's fine. It's just a little nitpick from me. And then with the whole ending with Ali just going fucking ballistic and killing Alamo and just going to a strip club and being the one to kill him, I thought was just, what the fuck? Okay, again, entertaining TV. Doesn't make fucking sense. I don't think so, but sure. For a finale, sure, let's fucking do it. I don't take the show that seriously anyway, so it's fine. That was the scene that I thought was the exact same from Django Unchained. If you guys look at this scene between Jamie Foxx and Samuel L. Jackson, it was almost identical. It was so similar. I'm sorry. I just thought, okay, like, I see your inspiration. And then the very last scene of Ollie visiting that family, there was a whole religious aspect that I didn't mention because they don't really dive too deep into it, to be honest. It's this weird, they kind of hack it on throughout the season, and I think it made sense, actually, because when you rewatch the show, there was quite a few mentions of religion throughout and nods to it because, again, back with that season 2 scene with Zendaya hugging Labyrinth, when he's singing to her, I'm trying, or I'm tired, it's in a church, right? And then she mentions her mom going to church, and we see her mom giving a speech in church. So there are those themes-ish in the show. So I get why they would want to explore that a bit in the season, especially that is something that is kind of known, that if you are struggling with addiction, you know, sometimes people turn to faith afterwards. And so it did seem natural, but the way they did it just felt very empty as well, unfortunately. So just didn't feel like he really tried to explore that, though. He just had Zendaya talking about some Bible quotes and believing God's talking to her through a tree. I felt like someone who wanted to use religion as a concept for their show but doesn't actually go to church. At the end, they have Ollie visit this family that Zendaya was with for a while there before getting wrapped up into all this business, and that's where she found her peace. That's where she felt happy, was with this family, and that's how she started getting more religious and into God. And so he goes, visits them, and we get this prayer. I thought that was touching. That did touch me, and I got emotional about it. And then they show the American flag, and Zendaya saying, "May God bless us all." I'll say, to me, I don't know how to feel about it, actually. This is coming from someone who's Catholic, by the way. I just feel like I want to appreciate the choice of words in terms of bless us all, because I feel like there's a lot of propaganda of God bless America in particular, and this very view of religion and the way that some people are spinning religion these days and using it and weaponizing it, which I don't appreciate. But with the choice of words of "May God bless us all," it felt okay, that's nice because that's not bless America, it's everyone. That's a nice choice. But then you're showing the American flag, and people have noted too that it's this white family with this big house that seems to be living the American dream. So it's kind of, yeah, I don't know. Let me know how you guys felt about it. Sam Levinson said in interviews he wanted this season to be about the American dream and how the American dream is far from reach for a lot of people, and that's unfortunate. That's the way that the show ends, which is very interesting and was not on my bingo card with how Euphoria was going to end, but here we are. That, my friends, is Euphoria. Let me know your thoughts on it because obviously everybody has a right to their own opinion. My opinion is just my opinion, and it's just my humble opinion. But you have a right to your opinion. Thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time. Mwah.